The next part of our session will focus on the 6 instructional shifts in ELA, which is English Language Arts. You'll see the 6 there in front of you, and you'll notice that the first one, Balancing Information and Literary Text, is sometimes found K5, and that the second one, Building Knowledge in the Disciplines, is sometimes found 612. And I think that that's because when you look at the middle school grades, they are more content specific. Therefore, building that knowledge in the disciplines or the content areas is an important and integral part of English language arts. When we talk about balancing informational and literary text, it means that students read a true balance of informational and literary texts. An elementary classroom is a place where students can access the world, as is a middle school classroom or a high school classroom. They see science, social studies, the arts, and literature through a variety of text. The goal with the Common Core State Standards is now that 50% of what students read becomes informational at the early elementary level. On the next page, you'll see a chart that breaks it down for between 4, 8, and 12. Notice that by the end of 12th grade, 70% of all reading must be nonfiction. This is a significant change for what students are reading in classroom instruction. This is an example of the model content framework that was in the readings from the Park website and the Park documents. What you'll notice here is that the different modules represent the number of text that are short text and the number of extended text that students should be reading in a particular genre. What you see here aligns with those Common Core expectations in that half of it is literature and the other half is informational. We'll continue to talk about writing, but you'll notice in these framework charts that it also specifies the genres for a particular grade level. This one here is for 3rd grade, which is where the content frameworks start, since the Park is modeling their assessment materials by grades 3 and up.
If you were to put this image up on your classroom and say, let's brainstorm what you might be looking at, as part of our group discussion, some ideas that came up were a satellite image of the Earth, a bird feather, an owl. All of these would have been suggestions that would have then sparked an additional conversation. Those discussions could have started some sort of intrigue on behalf of the students, which would then allow me to say, oh, by the way, I have this article on owl butterflies, but we're not going to read it until later in the period, and I could push it off onto the side of my desk. We all know how many times those students are going to ask, when are we going to read that article? When are we going to read that article? And that inspires those students to then emphasize their literacy experiences as part of the planning and instruction of my class. Students learn through those domain-specific texts, and here's an example of a way that we can get those juices flowing and that intrigue built without having to say, okay, everyone take out your pencil and paper, we're all going to read an article now about the owl butterfly. It provides a much more interesting way to present the information.
The third shift is the staircase of complexity. And what you'll see on the screen here is the perfect pair of shoes. In order to prepare our students for the complexity of college and career-ready text, each grade level requires a step of growth on this staircase. So you'll see that the left shoe represents students reading at grade level, and the right shoe represents students reading at their instructional and their independent levels. So student levels particular to their needs. Students are reading now at grade appropriate text around which that instruction is centered. Teachers are careful and patient and create more time or space into the curriculum so this close and careful reading can occur. This will allow that appropriate and necessary scaffolding for students who aren't reading at a grade level to read their grade level materials. For example, If a student is in 4th grade and they are reading at a 2nd grade level, they are still being exposed to that grade level material. So they're still getting 4th grade text exposure that is scaffolded through the teacher's instruction. That's why we really have a balance here of our perfect pair, so that we can find the balance between what the student needs to move forward and what they also need exposure to have that staircase of complexity. Here you'll notice the Lexile levels of current typical text by grade level and the Common Core text complexity of Lexile ranges. These ranges are now increased by about 2 grade levels. So on the left you'll see that 5th and 6th grade spans from 730 till 920. Now with the new Common Core expectations, students in grades 4th through 5th grade should be reading at that same range of about 770 to 980.
The fourth shift for ELA is about text-based answers and arguments to support your text. This really is another way of saying extended response. Students have a rich and rigorous conversations that are dependent on the common text, and so having them be able to cite in the text where they are getting their arguments from is only going to increase their ability to support those arguments.
The 5th shift is writing from sources. Writing needs to emphasize the use of evidence to inform or make an argument, rather than the personal narrative that we are typically used to doing, and other forms of decontextualized prompts. While the narrative still has an important role, students are developing skills through written arguments that respond to ideas, events, facts, and arguments presented in the text that they read. Here you'll notice the shifts in writing according to the Common Core and the requirements that are addressed. You'll notice that, especially through evidence-based persuasive writing, persuasive represents nearly a third of all writing in 4th grade, a third of all writing in 8th grade, and nearly a half of all writing in 12th grade. The other two areas, explain and to convey an experience, are also specific types of writing that you'll see the shift in what students are expected to write in.
The last shift for ELA is academic vocabulary. Students are constantly building vocabulary that they need in order to access their grade level complex texts, but really the focus should be more on commonly found words rather than the traditional words that we use for vocabulary. For example, words like discourse, generation, theory, principle are words that they're going to come across in primary texts, but they're not necessarily words that you would think of as words that we learn the definitions for, like automatopoeia or homonym. Teachers are constantly building students' ability to access more complex text across the content areas, and by pulling out words from that primary text, students will have more context in order to learn those definitions.
As part of our readings, we took a look at the SEC, the Survey of Enacted Curriculum website, where we could delve into the content comparisons between the Illinois state standards and the Common Core state standards. What you see here is a 5th grade sample, and on the left you'll see the Common Core state standard drop down. On the right, the Illinois frameworks for 5th grade in math. We can compare the way that they would address a particular skill in the Common Core standards and the Illinois framework. For example, if you look at the top number sense, properties, and relationships, you see that the colors are slightly different. And that color chart in the top left corner is a representation of the percentage of content skills that relate into that area. Now there are 5 different boxes, so if you draw your eyes down vertically to the bottom, that's where you'll notice the student expectations. So the very first row, or column I should say, is memorization, facts, definitions. That's a level 1. The second one is a level 2, and so on in terms of their level of rigor. So the current Common Core standards have an emphasis on level 2 and 3, and the old Illinois framework had an emphasis on 1 and 2. This is a correlation between that level of rigor, or how much in depth the Common Core state standards are intended to go.
The strategy we used for this discussion question was called a silent blog. And using a blank sheet of computer paper, each person at the table starts with their own sheet. And in the center of the circle, they write a comment or a reflection based on the information presented. And then the sheets, everyone having filled out their own initial comment, pass the sheet either in clockwise or counterclockwise direction. And you either extend your thought and someone else gets to provide a comment as it continues going around the circle.